Hello, George Agnew here again, going on another walk from Blackthorpe Barn with Bolly the dog, and today we're going to go into Rougham Park, which means we're going to cross the A14 by a bridge and go into the park seeing lots of daffodils because it's that time of year, and we're going to do some exploring there and see one or two things, including a dog's grave, which is a dog that belonged to my great-grandfather, and we'll hear more about that as we go along. Okay, so let's set off on the walk. As usual, these walks start by going down this little pathway away from the barn, and we're going to be heading through the car parks on the Downs Wood in the usual way. But then we'll be turning left and it'll all become pastures new. I've been told to remind people that we actually have a poo bin here at the barn. So if you've been taking your dog for a walk and you've got a bag with some dog poo in it, we do have a place for that to go. And just here on the right is our wonderful poo bin there, which is waiting for any dog poo that gets put into it. So now setting off as usual across the car park. On the left are the meadows, the Rookery Meadow with its ancient trees, some of which are just hulks lying on the ground. Others are fairly healthy. And the one just there, I'm afraid, is dying. But it's dying in a rather graceful way. The ground here is so sandy. It's amazing how these trees have grown and survived all these years the way they have, I think. And now with climate change, I think it's putting extra stress on them. And some of them are just not surviving it, which is very sad. But now we're approaching the Downs Wood. Here on the right, famous blackthorn tree, which we seem to be looking at every week. Every week it changes a little bit. Now the leaves are out. You can see what blackthorn leaves look like. And the flowers are still there, but they are gradually fading as the petals fall on the ground. And so we're going to dive into the wood now here on the right, following the path. And Bolly knows his way because we do this so often. This is actually the second time we've walked along here this morning, so he's very familiar with it. As I said, we're going to be seeing some daffodils later on. There are, of course, daffodils all over the place, but the ones in Rougham Park are a bit special. They were planted in about 1897, and so they're nearly 120 years old, and so they're ancient varieties which are probably, a lot of them, no longer available because people tend to buy these rather brash colours now. I just saw some rather brash looking daffodils here which are probably part of this sort of modern hybrid daffodil world, whereas the things planted in the late 19th century were a very different thing. We will see them later on as we walk through the park. Taking the left fork here in the wood, approaching this lovely old oak tree, and ahead of us is a sort of clump of holly trees, which are really rather lovely in the winter, seeing them with their leaves when there's so little that's got leaves. But if you look here, you could see that we're beginning to get buds and things coming into leaf. Isn't that lovely? That is hazel, and birds are singing. I hope you can hear that. And here, let's look at this. This is a tiny, tiny little holly tree. Is that actually visible on the thing? There it is. So that's come from that big group, and this is how they spread, I suppose. And if you start looking for them, there's another one here. In fact, there's a group of them here. Quite a lot of them. Yes, there's probably a dozen little holly trees there, which will gradually develop and help to colonise this part of the wood. We've been having a really, really, really wet winter and a wet spring. Hasn't rained very much for a few days, and so it's a little tiny bit drier. But I'm still wearing my boots, and it really is still quite muddy. I would recommend people wear waterproof gear on these walks, and there are usually muddy patches. And so here, for example, in the Downs Wood, we have a muddy patch here, which Boll is just crossing. It's not as bad as it was, but if you're not wearing the right sort of footwear, if you're wearing white trainers or something, you'll probably not be too pleased. Scots pines on the right, looking majestic. It's interesting when you plant conifer trees particularly. I always think they look rather mean and nasty. It may be partly that they tend to get planted en masse in plantations, and then there's suddenly a transformational moment when they become rather beautiful. And these Scots pines have gone through that transition and suddenly are becoming a joy. I used to moan at my father for all the conifer trees he planted, and he used to say to me, you'll appreciate them one day. And he's right, you do. You begin to see the beauty in them. Serried ranks of tens of thousands of them in small regimented plantations are still nothing very much to look at, but later on, when they get up to about 30 feet high, they suddenly begin to form individual characters, and it gets to be a bit of a sort of majesty about them. And you can see where they're going, and they just get better and better. Here's the fallen oak tree, which it's very lucky it fell that direction, so we can just leave it. We don't have to worry about clearing that up or anything. The problem with this deadwood business in woodlands is that people are always going around looking for firewood, and it seems very mean to tell them they can't pick it up. On the other hand, we need the wood to rot down here in the woodland. So I have to make a bit of a balance when I meet anybody who's obviously collected some firewood. I usually don't say anything and just rather hope they don't do it a lot. And if I see people doing it repeatedly, then I have to have a little word with them so they can understand what's happening. We're coming to the twisty bit at the end of this path. It's also the muddiest bit. And then we're going to be turning left, which is first time on these films I think that we've done that. Normally we've turned right and headed south through the estate. Today we're going to be turning left and heading north. Now this is still quite muddy. Yesterday I found myself in a puddle where the water nearly came over the top of the boots. I climbed out of my car straight into this puddle. It was quite a surprise. Getting back into the car was also quite interesting. Right, here we come. Here's the junction. And this time, Bolly, we're going to go left. Come on, this way. And so, pastures new for viewers of these little films. Now we're heading north. And there's quite a lot of mud along here as well, actually. I do walk this a great deal, and sometimes without wearing boots. It is quite tricky, teetering along the edge of the path where it's slightly less muddy. Now the Scots pines here on the left are slightly smaller, and I think they're still the other side of that transition. They don't feel like interesting trees to me yet, but the ones that we were looking at a moment ago do, and that is, it's funny how that just happens. There's a buzzard which is sitting on a branch of one of these trees about 100 metres ahead. I'm sure it'll fly away in a minute. I can no longer see it, but if it's still, there it goes. There it goes. On the left here we have two more air raid shelters, similar to the ones at the other end of the Downs Wood. They're sort of like sentinels at the entrance to the wood at each end. This is blackthorn here. A very sort of collapsed blackthorn tree, which is very, very spreading and rather beautiful. And we're coming up to the concrete road, which is going to lead us across the A14 in a minute. So now we turn right. Here is the road, that's the view to the left. And the view to the right, which is where we're going. And we're going to go over the bridge. So this road goes up here and it splits into two. The right-hand bit goes down and away, and that's not the way you wish to go. You want to go up the slope, straight on over the bridge. It's probably going to get rather noisy as we go over this bridge because of the traffic, and it may be quite hard to hear anything that I might try to say. When the bridge was first built, we planted these trees on either side of it as a sort of screen, to screen the abutments of the bridge. And now it's become its own little sort of woodland here in a very scrawny sort of way. And certainly has a massive impact on reducing the noise level. But we're getting closer to the span of the bridge now, and it's going to get really rather noisy. See the traffic There, heading towards Bury, and on the other side, the traffic heading towards Ipswich. But we're going north. And in a moment, a new vista will show itself, which I think is a dramatic change from that bridge. Here on the left, we have the first view of Rougham Park. Beautiful meadow, cattle, trees, everything from young trees planted to commemorate the millennium, like that one in the fence, the hulk of a dead oak, and then older oaks and other millennium trees. And we follow our path down now the other side of the bridge. Ahead of us here is the home farm, which is a very functional base for our grazing cattle man, Tom Long, who has all the cattle and all the meadows on the estate, and he's a very good cattleman. Very pleased to have him here. And also there is a whole load of lorries, because we have a bit of a lorry park here as well. The economics of livestock, particularly in the east of England, are such that they don't really make any money. It's more a sort of lifestyle. And so the lorry park and the revenue from that helps to fund a lot of the fencing for the cattle and the costs associated with that. We're now going to be walking along the side of the A14 for a couple of 100 metres. Again, it'll be pretty noisy, but then we get away from it. On our left, there are a couple of very, very ancient oak trees. The first one here, which has had to have quite a lot of tree surgery recently, and the one at the other end of this row of 4 houses. They are some of the oldest on the estate, and particularly this second one here has an incredible girth. You could see it there. It's nearly 9 metres round. The girth of these trees is always an indication of their age, and so that tree is terrifically old. Well, we're walking along the edge of the park of the new Rougham Hall. The old Rougham Hall was on our right, the other side of the road, that disappeared during the 19th century. Rougham Hall Nurseries, which still exists and is still named after the original Rougham Hall, is the old walled gardens of the original Rougham Hall. That's there on the right. Maybe you could see their sign. Very shortly now we'll be turning left and getting away from all this noise. Here's the estate office, where I spend quite a lot of my time, and we have quite a lot of people work there now. And we're heading north, and we come to a gate which we have to cross, which we have to go through. It's electric gates here for vehicles, but there's this special gate here for walkers and riders. And we have to go through that on the right. Don't try to push your way through the electric gates. They don't cope with that. Somebody did that in the very, very early stages of having them and broke them on the first week. Right, we're entering Rougham Park. This is the park of the new Rougham Hall, built in the probably starting in about 1818, 1819, and completed in the mid-1820s. Not by my family, but by predecessors here. And then the driveway we're going along, which is lined with all these daffodils. These are the daffodils I was talking about earlier. They are probably planted in about 1897, when the then owner of the estate and of the hall, who's called Edwin Johnston, he was a very rich man, and he had an enormous refurbishment done of the gardens around the hall. And a man called George Paul, who's an expert rose grower and breeder, some of whose roses are still in use today, was brought in to design and redesign the gardens. And he rerouted some of the driveways. This drive, I think, is a rerouted version of the original, and planted all these daffodils, tens of thousands of daffodils, along the road. There are also snowdrops, which are not obviously as conspicuous as these daffodils. Later on, this driveway swings round to the left, and that's where the daffodils continue. We will at that point be actually going right for the purposes of this walk. And if you can see an electric fence along beside the daffodils, that's to keep the cattle off them, which has been an issue, and so this is the new arrangement. One stage there used to be post and rail fences either side of this drive, but we've tried to make it more open plan and to reduce the amount of fencing which needs to constantly be replaced. So we put in cattle grids instead and opened the whole thing up. And then we were faced with having to look after the daffodils, which is how we're now doing it. So you can see where the snowdrops were, along with the daffodils. And these are blends of many different sorts of daffodils, which were put together by a man whose name might come to me in a moment, who produced catalogues of daffodils, and then people would buy them by the tens of thousands for these sort of parkland situations. And I think the idea was that there were slightly different colours, slightly different flowering times would extend the flowering season and create more interest than just having one single sort. Walking further into the park now. Sound of the A14 is fading a lot, which is nice. And we're coming to a junction, and we're going to be turning right. When we get there, options exist to go left or straight on, but we're going to be going right. Rougham Hall was bombed in 1940 on the 23rd of September, and the gardens here stopped being maintained shortly after that time. My great-grandfather, who had bought this place quite a lot because of the gardens, was in his high 80s and had been really, really shocked by the bombing, and I don't think he ever really recovered from it. And I think that his son, my grandfather, wasn't really particularly interested in spending money on the gardens, and so he let them basically go wild. The tree I'm filming is a walnut tree, which is a feature on the corner here. And there's a wonderful old skeletal oak, which is like some sort of character out of Tolkien. One thinks of Treebeard and people like that. Now here we go through a bit of an archway created by laurel, and we come to this dividing of the ways, and we're going to be going right here. This is now a driveway which was created by my great-grandfather, I think really to gain access to Thurston Station, which of course was a hugely important transport hub for local people at that time, when cars were only just starting, and so this road would have been the way people would have gone to the station. My grandfather planted an avenue here of Douglas firs. I mean, this tree I'm now showing you is one of the Douglas firs that he planted. The thing about Douglas firs is that we plant them for forestry, and they are wonderful forestry trees, but they do really need a lot more water, as they come from Western Canada, where the water would be, the rainfall would be many times what we have here. And they've always struggled here, and they are coming towards the end of their lives. A lot of them are dying in the top. And so my father and I replanted in between them with Wellingtonias, which are, let's see if I can remember the Latin for that, it's Sequoiadendron giganticum, I think, the giant sequoia, which again come from Western United States, but we think they're a little bit more tolerant to drought. They're much bigger. They will become very, very tall trees, and I do wonder whether we planted them a bit too close. This is one of those, and this is a very young, that tree is about 25 years old, 25, maybe 30 years old now, and it's just at this stage where it's transforming itself from being a young tree into something a bit more interesting. Next door to it, we've actually got a larch which somehow found its way into the avenue. There are a few extraneous trees here which aren't really part of the avenue plan. But this driveway is actually really lovely at all times of year. People, when we planted the Wellingtonias, people said, well, are you going to cut down the Douglas fir shortly? And I absolutely resisted that. So effectively what we have is the old avenue and the new avenue side by side at the moment. This is one of the Douglas fir trees. You can see the amazing trunk. I mean, they are wonderful. It's just you have to plan ahead. You have to plan ahead probably 50 years to make sure there's something else growing here when these things all die. And quite a lot of them are now dying in the tops and don't look really very lovely at all anymore. And they're dropping a lot of limbs, which is usually a sign that they're not doing well. This is one of the bigger Wellingtonias, which is really quite a big tree. Now, we mustn't get too distracted because we're going to be turning left very shortly here. On the right, a bit of a landmark, is an enormous rhododendron, which in the early summer, is a sea of red flowers. So if you keep a bit of an eye out for that, and the trackway going into the right, very shortly after that, you're going to be turning left. So if we now look to the left, we're going to see some Christmas tree plantations with deer fencing. There, you can see them on the screen. And we're going to go down here just to the left of this fence. So we pass the fence on our right and we're heading north into the park. And you can see that this is what happens when you start planting Christmas trees. They look like that. Very, very small, in little tiny rows. And you have to have a fence around the outside because rabbits and deer love to eat them. If you're not careful, you end up with losing the whole lot. So we have to now put deer fence around all these plantations. On the left, we've got another clump of the Rougham poplars, which got planted everywhere. It's a slightly wet spot just there, and I think my father thought there was an opportunity to plant another 20 or 30 trees for matches. And as we have discovered, the match tree industry moved on with the opening up of Eastern Europe, and nobody wanted matches from poplar trees. And you could get very, very cheap timber from Eastern Europe, Poland, Baltic states, places like that. So we're now walking across a sort of curious triangle of opened space, heading for the corner over there ahead of us, which is where we go through into the next bit of the park. This is all described in the written instructions. And you'll see that when you get there, there's quite a gap to go in. There's another clump of Scots pine here on the right, which are which I think have quite a lot of character. I think it's because they're trees on the edge of the plantation and they have branches lower down, which makes such a difference. The trees in the middle lose all their lower branches and you just get these trunks with these sort of scars of where the branches used to be, which I think is probably why they don't look very interesting. The ones on the edge with branches hanging down much lower suddenly have much more character. Right, so we're heading for this little corner, which is fairly evident, I think. And we're then going to be following the path along for about another 100 metres or two before we turn left. On the right here you can see underneath the trees there are a lot of banks, and I don't know how they came about. I don't know if they're natural or if somebody was trying to excavate something there. It's very almost like Breckland soil just in this bit round here, very black, but not black with compost. And not very fertile. Good place to be planting trees. And as we walk through here, we can see a different sort of landscape from what you've seen in the rest of the estate so far. It's a mixture of hardwoods, oaks, and I'm afraid a lot of sycamore here now, which has been spreading on its own account in here. And a lot of conifer and a lot of rhododendron. The rhododendrons like the acid soil around here. So there's a little sort of clump of them in this corner of the estate. Now we're coming to a place where we're going to turn left. So you can see the road going on ahead of us. But if we look to the left, you could see a wide sweeping bank, grassy bank, the slope up to the right a little bit, and this is where we walk. The rhododendrons here on the right, which are certainly not in flower, but you can see the buds forming. And these are the wild ones, the ponticums, which a lot of people are rather rude about. I don't mind them at all. They spread in this landscape, but not hugely. And they don't really go outside it because this little patch of acid soil is the only place they like to be. So they're pretty well contained here. This is another Scots pine plantation on the left. My father planted many years ago. It's always known rather romantically as Compartment 6, which is not very lovely, but everything had to have a name. And that actually won some national awards for the quality of the forestry in there. So I'm quite happy with the name Compartment 6. And underneath you can see rhododendrons growing there too. That's also ponticums. Walking up this gentle slope. At the top here we're going to meet a ride or driveway through the park, and we're going to be turning left. So we're walking up to a T-junction, I suppose. This driveway is really not used anymore, so it's very covered in leaves, and it's sort of subsiding back into the landscape, I think you have to say. But there's enough of it to be able to see where it is. So ahead of you, just as a marker, there is a fallen oak. You absolutely don't want to go up that way. To the right, the driveway goes like that, but we're actually going to the left. So we're now turning this way to the left and following this drive. With Compartment 6 on our left, more rhododendrons on our right, and this pathway is going to take us towards the centre of the park. Historically, this driveway led to a lodge which was called the Roundhouse. And the house is still there and it's still round, and it's a very unique building which is rented out to some tenants. But this roadway has been closed, so they just go in and out onto the Thurston Road, because we have to try to limit the number of accesses into the parkland here so that we can keep a bit of an eye on what people are up to here. It's a very inviting area, and we have to be careful. I'm trusting that anybody who takes the interest to watch this is going to be respectful of this area. And it's a bit of a a leap of faith on my part to be showing people this, and I'm trusting that people will look after it and care for it like I do, and then we can continue to let people in here. The rhododendrons are getting more intense as we go up this way, and overtopped by the Scots pine. When my father was trying to plant these trees, I think the rhododendrons were a problem for him because they were just smothering the trees. But trees have long, long ago got away from the rhododendrons, and it causes no problem at all. We're approaching the site of the Rougham Hall, which was bombed in 1940. We're not going to be going in there, partly because there are people who live in the houses nearby whose privacy needs to be respected, and we're just going to skirt around the edge of this area before we head off to the left. And I think you can probably see a house beginning to appear, which was the old garage for the hall, which has been converted into a house. Some people living there. The area where we are at the moment was at one stage an aviary for Edwin Johnson's wife, whose name was Ada, was a passionate collector of rare birds, and she used to fund expeditions to the Philippines and places to try to find rare birds. And there is a lorikeet, which is actually named after her. Now, here we can see some of the buildings. I'm not going to be filming too closely because it's respecting the privacy. But what you can see is that the driveway we will be following swings round to the left. And it is most important that you don't spend your time looking in through people's windows. I'm sure you all understand that. And we're now swinging around to the left. I'll just give you a quick little glimpse of the clock tower for Rougham Hall, which is in the stable yard. But that also is really the residential area of several tenants now, and so we have to respect their privacy. We've turned left again, and we're following this driveway, which is a much more clearer driveway. It's the road that people use to access these houses up by the hall, and you could well meet traffic along here, delivery vans, cars, all sorts of things. On the right is a metal fence line, which I think you can see there just, which mark the edges here of the 15 acres around the house, the hall, which were called the pleasure grounds. And within that area there are very fancy rhododendrons and many other things. There was a double border created by my great-grandfather, which went off to the right somewhere along here. I'm not encouraging any of you to go wandering in there, please. This walk should be enough to give you a real flavour of the area. And shortly we're going to discover a dog's grave. My great-grandfather was very, very fond of Scotland, and there was an area he kept going to in Scotland called Loch Tummel, and he had a little Scotty Terrier dog, and he called that after this part of Scotland, and so the dog is called Tummel. And when Tummel died, my great-grandfather planted him under the great spreading oak tree on the edge of the pleasure grounds. And we are shortly going to see the gravestone, because he erected a proper gravestone with the dog's name, and just along here we're going to find this on the right hand side. Not quite yet, but we're getting closer. It's common enough to have dogs' graves, but to actually have one with a proper gravestone is quite unusual. And it's just part of discovering the world here. Now I'm looking around in case I'd missed it. I think it's just coming up here on the right in a moment. And the tree that it was planted beside, that he was buried beside, became very dangerous, and sadly we had to cut it down. And so here we are, here's the trunk of the tree, and to the right and behind it is the gravestone. And we're going to see if we can get in there to have a little look. I'm going to climb over this fence, get Bolly over, and we're going to have a look at the inscription. Come on, Bolly. Bolly! Doesn't want to come in. What I'll do is I'll just extend the lead. And here we have the gravestone. It says, "In memory of Tummel, our Aberdeen Scotty." No, well, I can't actually read this very well, but you can probably see it better on the film than I can. But we're going to see what's happened to the tree at the end of this walk, because that tree has been saved and turned into a sculpture. And here we have this enormous trunk, and you can see the rot in the middle of it, which was the thing which was causing us worry, because this driveway, as I said earlier, is used by a lot of people. Come on, buddy, through you go. And so, just climbing the fence, you can see what a massive trunk it was and why it was an appropriate tree to bury a dog under. And it's made an extraordinary sculpture, which we're going to see when we get to the end of this walk. So now we carry on down here. The reason I couldn't read that probably was the fact that I've taken my glasses off. Suddenly remember, I took my glasses off because they're also sunglasses, and because I do a little bit to camera at the beginning of each of these films. Ooh, there's a car coming. I do a bit to camera at the beginning of each of these films. I try not to have the glasses on because it looks like I've got very dark glasses. And then I forget that I haven't got them on and I can't really see properly. Right, now I was telling you about this avenue of trees we walked along earlier, with the Douglas firs and the Douglas firs and the Wellingtonias. In the middle there, you will see the Douglas fir with the dead top, which is frankly dying, and you can see the Wellingtonias planted either side coming along to take over. But it gives a flavour of what's happening here. Gradually all these trees are going to go like that, and if we don't do something, we're going to end up with no avenue at all. Because those sort of trees they're not going to make great interesting hulks in the way that lime trees and oak trees do, unfortunately. So we have to plan for a new avenue. Now we are meeting the bit of ground where we went off before, and the path we followed was down there to the left. We're now coming back the other arm of the triangle and heading back onto the driveway we came on the way into the park, and in the distance you may be able to see, or you will shortly be able to see, all these daffodils which we were looking at earlier, because we're now going to be retracing our steps. So here we are, beginning the return walk to the barn. The daffodils appearing on our right. They're all quite subtle varieties. And it may be they're getting smaller as time goes on. In a smaller garden, people would say, oh, you should lift them all and spread them out and then replant them. I'm afraid on the scale we have here, this is not really an option. So we just let them carry on growing in their own way. There's another cattle grid coming up here. There's no gate on this one because there isn't a dangerous road on this side. The other side has a gate because of the A14. When we put cattle grids in, we were assured that they would be totally stock-proof. We have actually found that the occasional cow will get over it and you find cows standing on the other side of the cattle grid next door to the A14, which is quite alarming. So since then we put electric gates up, and they've made a big difference. I don't recommend walking over a cattle grid. Twisted ankles and broken ankles can result really rather easily. When I take parties of people up to the hall here in groups of about 25 or something like that, when we approach these cattle grids, I know there's always going to be somebody who will walk across the grid. And so far nobody has actually injured themselves, I'm glad to say, but it's a little silly, I think. They're designed to be sufficiently off-putting to stop livestock going over them, and I think we should all follow suit, really. Now, I'm afraid we are getting closer to the A14 again, and you can probably hear the sound of it and see the movement of traffic along it. So what we're doing is retracing our steps up to the other cattle grid by the Rougham Estate Office. We go through the little gate on the left there and then follow the road along the side of the A14. Any dogs should be kept on very short leads for that section. I don't need to say how dangerous this road is. It's an extraordinary hulk of a tree here. I think that this bit of parkland here, with these ancient oaks in it, must originally have actually formed part of the park of the old Rougham Hall on the other side of the road. And they would have had the public road running through their park quite close to the house, and was one of the reasons why I think they moved. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I think that must have been a big factor. And so out of the windows of their house, if they looked north, they would have seen these meadows and these oaks, and that would have seemed to be part of their grounds, their park at the time. The estate office here on the left is actually one of the lodges of the new hall. Rather elegantly built in flint with red brick, Rougham red brick. Now we're going to go through this gate. Pull the pole to the side, and through you go. And here is the estate office on the left. I'll pull Bolly onto a short lead now. That's the entrance to Rougham Hall Nurseries. Customer arriving. And we follow this little concrete road again, heading back to the bridge. Another amazing oak tree. Won't be long before we're past the worst of this. I'm already just moving a few metres further away and the sound level drops a little. Home farm on the right and the lorry park on our immediate right. Now we start going up the slope to go over the bridge. Noise is subsiding briefly as we swing round the corner to align with the central section of the bridge. So we can briefly enjoy the view of this meadow over to the right. As we walk up the hill. There is a public footpath which goes across this meadow, And we'll shortly be passing the kissing gate associated with that. One of the other walks that I take people on actually comes across this public right-of-way, across the meadow here, and comes up this steep bank and goes through this kissing gate. It's probably one of the slightly more challenging walks because of the livestock, the kissing gate and the steep bank. People doing that have to have a reasonable level of fitness and to not be alarmed by the livestock. We're now approaching the central span of the bridge. The noise will get to its maximum and then we'll quickly get away from it again. This is the view towards Ipswich. And we're heading for the welcoming shelter provided by these conifers which we planted. Already I can sense the sound level dropping. Oh, it's so much nicer. It is so much nicer when you get away from that. It's really not lovely. This walk, you have to be aware, involves that unfortunate aspect in the middle, but I hope the things you see on the far side make it worth it. There are 2-3 walks we do where we go over this bridge and into the park. And this is a new thing to open these up to the public. And I very much hope people will enjoy them and respect them. Now, we're coming down to the bottom of this slope and we swing round to the right, which will take us back to the Blackthorpe Barn. If we look to the top of these trees here, you can see a whole load of mistletoe growing in the trees, which is rather wonderful. In a way, most wonderful, the fact that we can't reach it. So it doesn't get harvested at Christmas, and it's allowed to grow in these glorious spheres up in the tree. On the return walk here to the barn, what I usually do is to just go straight along here, the direct route along the concrete road and the tarmac road, with the Christmas tree plantations on the right, and avoid going through the Downs Wood. You can, of course, retrace your steps through there if you'd like to, but I find people are usually quite tired at this stage and looking forward to getting back to the Roots Cafe and to their cars. You may be able to see in the tree plantation here on the right that we've cut down a lot of trees and put them in heaps. What we're actually doing, it looks very drastic. A lot of these trees are never a good enough shape to make it into Christmas trees. And for years you can keep growing them on in the hope that they will improve their form. But eventually you have to cut your losses. These trees are all going to be chopped for biomass, which is going to be made into energy, which I think goes to a power station at Thetford. So it's not wasted. And the trees in between, which are good enough to become Christmas trees, will be allowed to grow on into bigger sizes. And we have to clear fell these sites from time to time to actually be able to replant. So you'll see on your right in a minute an area which was replanted a year or two ago. We saw some trees which had just been planted a little way back on our walk. And here are some on the right, which have been here for a year or two. They're struggling a little bit because of the water shortage during summer and damage from rabbits, which have unfortunately managed to get into that plantation. On our left, Downs Wood, big old trees which have got character and lovely. Great big Scots pine there, full of character. I think the ones on the edges of the wood are always the ones with the most interest. So you can see one there with the branches hanging down. That's what helps a lot. Christmas, we cut some of the branches from here to make into wreaths. I don't think you would ever make an entire wreath out of them, but they're a wonderful addition to a wreath made of maybe Nordman fir, which also has that same blue-green quality to it. This hulk of a tree standing here on the right is an old oak. It's completely dead. It's sufficiently far away from the road for us to not have to worry about it blowing over. And it provides a wonderful perch for buzzards, birds of prey which are looking for mice and things like that in the plantations, maybe even baby rabbits, which unfortunately are in there. This morning I actually saw a red kite flying over the barn. They're not so unusual now. I still get quite excited. I tried to take a picture of it. Completely failed. And these trees on the right, growing along the fence line, they've actually come up through the fence. And now they're growing underneath the power lines. So we have to keep chopping them back because they mustn't touch the electricity wires. So they're never going to really make it into anything very much, but they're still quite nice trees, so we keep leaving them. More bits of the Downs Wood on the left. Some of the younger hardwood plantation that my father established in the last years of his life. And here we come to the edge of the barn car park. And the barn is not far away now. When we get to the barn, we're going to go and have a look at this tree, which, this oak tree, where my great-grandfather's dog Tummel was buried underneath and had to be felled. We saved the tree and turned it into a sculpture. And the sculpture represents the extraordinary life of a forest floor, both above and below ground. So people have now discovered how the root systems of trees integrate with each other, and actually, particularly through mycorrhizal fungi, there's a whole communication system in the wood. And this extraordinary discovery with something that I asked the sculptors to try to represent in their carving. It's something of a challenge. And my vision was that they should cut the tree lengthwise down the middle and open it up like a book and then carve the two inside surfaces. So we're going to go and have a look in a minute and see what they managed to do. Right, the barn is appearing on our left front and we're heading back down the path. There's a lot of building work going on here at the moment because we're creating a sunken garden in an old pit near the barn, and a whole load of different work specialisms have coincided today, and there's a huge push to get this thing ready almost by the end of the week. So we have pond makers, gas cylinder removers, diggers, electricians, carpenters, all here today, and there's an enormous push to try and get the work done by the end of the week, and then we will be planting the area up shortly afterwards. So we're going to go left now through the meadow, and here we find the tree which was growing over Tummel's grave. It's been sliced in half lengthways, and the two insides have been carved extensively, and then a dreaming face on both ends of the tree. So if we have a look at the carving, there are all sorts of features here. Of course, there are fungi, there are rabbits, there are millipedes, more fungi, more millipedes, other creeper crawlies, and there is a baby representing life in the future. On this side we have the world. We have to compare with the baby, we have a skull to represent the other end of life. More fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi are the threads that are connecting all these things. There is some sort of a creature, I'm not quite sure what it is. There's a fox, and there's some fox cubs, and come back up to the end here where the dreaming face is. So this is our sculpture, and it gives a new life to Tummel's tree. And then at the far end there's a very hollow oak tree. And to our right is the building work going on for the new garden, which will soon all be done. Very exciting. And so I'm now going to sign off. Thank you for watching today, and hope you'll listen to another walk another time. Thank you. Bye bye.